Listen, thank you so much, you guys, for inviting me to be here and make together. This is really exciting for me. I do want to preface that I normally like to spend about an hour and a half talking about this stuff, and I've condensed it quite a bit. So it's gonna be like information overload, but the idea is for each of us to take away something that is important to us as individuals that will then hopefully lead into more research on your own behalf and for future discovery. I do want to give a special shout out to Kirsten Belaire, who is my sister. She's the director of behavioral health for a non-for-profit. And she and I did research a number of years ago to help build this content. So without her, who is much smarter than I am, then I would not be here today. So thank you, sister. I did want to share, that I think language is really important for us as we move forward in our discovery today of what we're about to learn. I do want to share how I've been very fortunate to travel throughout a lot of the world and how that has altered my perception of design in many aspects. And I also lived in Buenos Aires, Argentina for 7 years. My lovely wife is from there. And I just want to preface that this is all about a designer's perspective through this. So, I am not claiming to be an expert on this. It's just I just turned 50 last month, and I think I have a number of years of thinking about things, and I wanted to share what my observations are and kind of build it into this particular presentation. So guess what, you guys? Only 36% of people tested can accurately identify their emotions when they're happening. That's not a lot, right? And I think emotional intelligence, EQ, can help us make sense of why. And EQ is about learning. It's sort of this never-ending, never-ceasing type of learning experience. And there's many languages that we have to think of. And if you look here, all of those, all the text back there is actually a lot of what you guys in the survey were putting down. And those are all different languages that apply to the basics and the basis of the foundation of design and creativity and interaction design, which is ourselves and our own personal psyche, if you will. And, I do want to preface that most of my data does come from very credible sources, 3 of them primarily. And you can take notes if you want, screenshots, but the first one is Dr. Phil. He has got, and I hope a lot of people are laughing at this, but he is definitely not one of my sources, but he's super funny and entertaining. And guess what? I've never missed an episode of Oprah. And that's a joke, by the way, for those who don't live in the United States. So that's not really credible. I'm actually lying about that. But we do like to feel good, right? So the TED Talks are always really amazing and interesting. And it only takes 18 minutes of our lives. So, we feel like we're doing some kind of investment. We're putting an investment in us. Well, the problem is that a lot of these things that we surround ourselves with are very anecdotal, And it's like we're drinking this Kool-Aid. We're constantly drinking something that is causing a bubble around us that doesn't allow us to go outside of that. And, you can't really blame ourselves necessarily, because there was a time when a lot of constructs were developed that have influenced us today. Like back in the 50s and the 40s, doctors were smoking inside of their offices and they advocated that it was okay. And now we look at it today and it's quite a huge problem. So if you start to look at that construct and how it affects us as individuals, a lot of our questions that we ask and a lot of the things we think about, the biases are generated from things that we don't even take time to understand why and where they come from. So really, why are we here? And I think there's a lack of innovation in the world. And from an industrial designer's perspective, it's a problem. This is the kind of stuff that if we're not really trying to design things that are truly sustainable and truly good for the environment, and also providing opportunities to change consumer behaviors and their knowledge base, this is going to continue to prevail. And it's going to continue to be a very big issue for us. And so as industrial designers in particular, we're kind of responsible. We're the design resources that usually build these products and then end up in a landfill. And just some data here, Americans represent 5% of the world's population, but generate 30% of the garbage. Americans waste or cause to be wasted nearly 1 million pounds of materials per person per year. And you and me, we have a role in this. Each time we make a design or product just for the sole reason of profit and not really solving problems with innovation, we're essentially contributing to this waste, right? So one way to combat this is to really start to think about how EQ and design and ourselves come together to really provide opportunities for possibilities that we didn't really know existed before. So one must invest in your self-knowledge because this is not a 3-second Google search. This is something that really needs to be prefaced by a lot of hard work. And so for me, just to give an example, I've been very fortunate. I've been able to create trend and design centers in some of the largest trade shows in the world to bring design the opportunity to have a voice. I've been on innovation councils. I've designed products internationally for French companies, and I also invest. I put my money where my mouth is, right? I invest in sustainable companies, both in France as well as in Argentina. I get involved with local organizations. I've been on a judge for different design awards. I've been connected to the universities of design around where I live. I've been doing a lot of conference curation and experience, which gives me a really awesome opportunity to talk to all the top designers in the world and ask them hard questions. And luckily, they're kind enough to give me their thoughts and their answers, which I hope makes me a little bit smarter and then provide value to you. And I also help build the Denver Design Week, which is a really successful design week here in Colorado. And for all of you who aren't doing this already, this club, which Make Together, is so important because we need to be able to connect as a community to things that are design related, but also sustainably related, right? So you can see like my trajectory from early 90s up till today. I've been involved constantly with different organizations. And I think that that's something that I would love for all of us to take away today, is to just make sure we're always engaged in connecting. And I am starting this January 1st, this month, I became the chair for IDSA. And it's a very huge undertaking. I really am scared, if I'm being honest. This is a big thing. I need to be able to have a voice to share the vision of the organization from industrial design's perspective, but also to understand that we're advocating as an organization on behalf of Mother Earth, not just on behalf of design and corporate profitability. So
congrats. Congrats.
Yes. So, and I just want to share a shout out with Unstoppable Conversations. I recently took their course on leader and leadership. I highly recommend it. Awesome. If you want to talk about it offline, I'm here for you. It's a life-changing kind of experience to really dig deep into the ontological and the phenomenological kinds of constructs and who we are as people and why we do the things we do. Really fantastic. So let's play a game here, you guys. So EQ, right? Emotional intelligence is what makes the behaviors of the creative distinct from your intellect, all right? The capacity to be aware of, control, and experience one's emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. This is what EQ is all about and what it does. IQ, which is your intelligence quotient, is stable over your lifetime. It's fixed at birth. So you could read all the books you want to read, and it's not really going to change your IQ. But the EQ aspect is a little bit more dynamic, not as static. And so you can grow your EQ. And IQ cannot be used to predict the amount of emotional intelligence there. So it really, the two do not equal each other. They need to be separated from that, from each other. But how does this relate to the creative and to the processes that we, endure and encounter every day through interaction design or whatnot? So just so you know, EQ has more impact on creatives than IQ. It accounts for about 58% of our performance. And so when you start to really understand that and break that down into our behaviors as individuals, you start to see how relative it is for us to make sure that we're digging deep into these constructs and really looking at it in a very important way. And as creatives, we have to read and understand and rationalize in our own way, because creatives oftentimes are very emotionally based animals, let's say. So it's important to remember that. And in some research from Harvard Business Review, I was surprised that every day in the US, there's approximately 55 million meetings a day here in the US. And the average length is about 60 minutes. But the problem is that often these meetings are kind of driven by somebody who is trying to validate their own agenda. And when you're in this sort of context where you're trying to contribute something meaningful, and you're a designer or creative, and the meetings are just sort of useless, how do you gauge yourself? How do you control your emotions during that time, right? How do you use that to your advantage? So the growth zone is an exercise that my sister and I have been working on, and it's a simple one. But really the primary focus here is to understand that we all have a safe zone that we start off with. And those can be things, words, descriptors like warm, peace, and you can add whatever it is for you, right? That's kind of what represents safe to me. And you can fill in, again, the words you want. But then when you go outside of your safe zone, you go into this sort of grown zone. And it can, the words and descriptors that you want to maybe look at are things similar to cold and maybe hostile or whatever. But when you get through from your safe zone and you go out into the grown, something happens and you're transformed. And through that transformation, you start to become more empowered and more capable. And then all of a sudden your safe zone is growing, right? It's no longer this big, it's now double that size. And obviously this is something that we have to keep doing for our entire lives. But, the idea again is don't get complacent. Don't feel like you're, always in that safe place. You really need to be out of that comfort zone. And so the growth trajectory obviously is to exponentially get bigger and bigger. So this would be kind of step 1, 2, 3, and 4 as an overview. So you guys remember what 36% represents? Zoe, what does it mean?
Oh, sorry.
36%, it represents how many people can accurately identify their emotions as they happen, right?
Oh, yes.
So,
I sorry, I missed that part.
That's okay. So we're going to do a little case study here.
One thing, stop. Is that just when they were getting tested for COVID or just in general? Or when people are freaked out?
This information is actually pre-COVID, so it has very little to do with COVID at this moment in time. I don't think there's enough research out there yet that would, validate one way or the other. Okay. So thank you for that question. So here we have some brands. I think most of us might have seen or heard of these guys, right? So the question I have for you is this next slide, based on these brands, which product goes to which brand? Just give it a little thought. You don't have to say anything out loud because I don't have a lot of time, but you start to see that it's kind of hard, right? It's a little bit difficult to know which brand goes with which phone. So let's do a little bit more of that. A lot of us drive a car, have been in a car, right? So these are some major brands for automobiles, and we're going to look at these and we're going to say, all right, which brand is Toyota? Which one is Chevy? Which one is, Nissan? And again, when you start to, and I did Photoshop out the logos because, that's obviously the one way that we seem to be able to identify what brand is what. All right, one more. Because of the foundation of all of us, we all walk at some point wherever we go, right? So these are some brands that make shoes. And so if we look at this and you Photoshop out the brands, it becomes very difficult to know who is who and what really differentiates them. If it wasn't for marketing and for messaging and things like that, and this sort of indoctrination of what we are supposed to think, we sometimes just can't tell. So this is the opportunity to dig deep, you guys, and kind of put on the scientist-like attributes, right, of who we are as people. So we're going to look at human attachment, and this is going to get slightly boring, but I think it's really important for all of us to just bear with and to think about this, okay? So, and why does attachment matter? Well, you have emotional self-awareness, you have self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. These are things that, again, go back to the 58% of the performance number that we were looking at a minute ago. And if you're working on these 5 different areas, then you're going to be developing a greater EQ. But emotional self-awareness is really knowing what you're doing, feeling, and don't know, to be aware of yourself in that sense. And the self-regulating is using emotions as indicators versus as drivers. Pursuing action, motivation is pursuing action and committing to choices and behaviors. And empathy, listening to others and sharing yourself authentically. And at some point, I'd love to have a cocktail with every one of you and ask, where does empathy really come from? Not just the science or the neurological aspects, but like really deep philosophical questions. Social skills, number 5, ability to understand other people and improve relationships. So you can see how these 5 areas are really important, right? But what we have to understand too is that life happens, and when we are during those formidable years of usually 0 to 5 years of age, things happen. People are subject to things that they didn't really ask for, and that affects their ability to look at life and look at things through certain optics in certain ways. So we're going to look at these 4 pillars of the attachment area: secure, anxious, resistant, avoidant, and disorganized. And this is something for each of you to just read quickly with me and say, yep, that's me, or nope, that's not me. So secure: caretakers balance nurture and caretaking with independence and exploration. Children see others as supportive, view themselves as competent, better at taking perspectives of others, and trust others. So that would be secure as a pillar. If you grew up in an environment where you had a lot of anxious resistance, that means the caretakers are over nurturing and reinforce the world is a scary place. Don't trust yourself or others. Children lack self-confidence, exaggerated emotional reactions, and social isolation. And if we look at avoidant, that's when caretakers are neglectful, they're absent, not attending to the children's needs. Children are less effective in managing stress, aggression, antisocial, as well as being isolated. And disorganized, I think I mostly identify with this. Caretakers are nurturing and neglectful. Children struggle with separation distress, display aggression, disruptive behaviors, see others as threats, switch between social withdrawal and defensive aggression. So again, those are just, I'm trying to really, boil this down into a small presentation for you, but these are, again, hopefully you'll think about these things on your own and research more. But my story is not different from those of some of you who really read that and said, that's me. This is me at Christmas when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And you can see that I wasn't very happy. I was very sad. And the reason for that is because I had a very tumultuous childhood, and I would not wish it on anybody. But I have a responsibility to understand where I came from and how I wound up being, right? So during these traumatic times, we have to understand that there's physiological things that happen to us. The brain changes, and I had to learn to change my behavior so that I could minimize any kind of ill that would happen to me. I had to learn to overcompensate. I learned to read people good, real good. And many of our psychological neuro mappings can be adjusted, but check this out. This is a scan of a normal brain versus a 3-year-old who had extreme neglect. There's a tremendous difference. So physiologically, someone during those 0 to 5 years who were exposed to certain things has physiologically some alterations. There's a reason why the behaviors can be the way they are. So now we're not talking about as a child, we're talking about what does that look like as an adult? Again, we have the 4 pillars there: secure, anxious, avoidant, disorganized. So as an adult, the secure, we're satisfied with relationships. We feel secure, connected, balanced with independence, increased honesty and emotional connectedness. And the EQ of that looks like components are likely already in place. So you kind of have a head start on people who didn't experience that. Anxious resistance, desperation for love and affection, incomplete without a significant other. Always have to be around people, need others to fix the problems. They're clingy, jealous, demanding, emotional. This is emotional dysregulation. And the EQ, self-regulation, motivation, and social skills might be really difficult. And we're almost through this heavy, thick stuff, so just bear with. An avoidant, keep distance from others, feel they don't need human connection to survive, thrive, insist on independence, emotionally shut down in threatening situations. And the EQ, emotional self-awareness, motivation, everything, and social skills are really difficult. And the last one, again, the thing that I think I recognize about myself most is the ambivalence rather than isolation. Avoid feelings because they overwhelm myself and them. Emotional dysregulation, there's mood swings, desire relationship and terrified of it at the same time, right? And the EQ, emotional self-awareness, self-regulation and motivation and empathy and social skills might be difficult. So I'm at that spectrum, at the end of the spectrum where I've got a lot I have to learn and to dig deep and to change about myself. So awareness and feedback are critical in order to do that. And I've learned very often our body language is certainly ways of communicating how we feel and what we're feeling without using any words. But we don't pay attention to it nearly enough. And not only that, but the universe has put in ourselves and our own bodies that when we start to feel certain things, it sends signals, and you feel twitches in your neck, or you kind of do this and you move around when you start to feel uncomfortable. But again, we seem to not really focus on that either. So innovation, in order to really compensate and to combat some of the issues that we were talking about earlier, is something we have to ask about. Where does it come from? And why is it so hard to tell the difference, right? And this is, again, coming from an industrial designer's perspective. We looked at these different products and we couldn't really easily see what the differences were or what the brands were. And then you have to dig deep into the kind of marketing and business research, which is, these numbers are a little old because I didn't want to add COVID necessarily, but everything that's happening right now with COVID, it didn't start because of COVID. It kind of started way back many years ago. And then because of COVID, it got exponentially worse. So, but you can see that like Apple versus Samsung versus LG and all these things, these brands have this hierarchy within the market stratosphere, right? And why? Because some make it seem like they're always innovative. Even if my computer wasn't working this morning, my Apple computer or my iPhone, and I had to reboot it, right? Samsung is amazing. They do some amazing things, but yet they've got this market strategy where they're always competing, and a little bit behind or below Apple. And then you've just got these copycat kinds of things. These are all perceptions that are fed to us that lead us to believe certain things. So we know that Apple never goes on sale, but we also see often that these other brands will do buy one, get one free or whatever. So these are the kind of things where innovation isn't necessarily what we want it to be or should be, especially from a sustainability standpoint. It's just more of a marketing, jargon. And I know I'm speaking very quickly, and I apologize for some of you who English is not your first language. But so how did this become our reality? How did we become so desensitized? I love this image from Martha Rosler. This is like, you can see her state-of-the-art vacuum cleaner, and she's got these really beautiful drapes that she's vacuuming, and she opens it up, and what does she see? She sees Vietnam going on, right? But yet it doesn't bother her. It doesn't, it's something that doesn't seem to really trouble her. And I think this really depicts our psyche as humans today and our level of complacency. We just sort of don't question things. It's there, and oh well. So where's the motivation to explore our EQ? I've already stated some things, but roughly 90% of high performers are high with EQ. And the average performer can make up to $29,000, $30,000 more a year because of having greater EQ. So from a monetary standpoint, there's motivation, right? Which really hits a lot of us, especially paying back school loans. But there's still a slight problem. And we are all addicts to that which stops us from reaching our fullest potential. We're addicts to sex, to religion, to food, to drugs. There's all kinds of things beyond this, right? And the biggest addiction of all, I think, is this smartphone technology. So for interaction design, for any kind of design that's really helping to perpetuate or to propel this industry, there's definitely things that we would want to think about that relates to ourselves, going all the way back to our psyches, as well as the behaviors of the consumers that is affected 10 years from now. And then just out of looking at that particular slide, how many of you wanted to look at your phone or have your phone in your hand? So the thing that we want to really make sense of is that this phone, right, is now being seen in schools with, of course, homeschooling. It's even worse now because of COVID. We're seeing it, as a distraction when driving. It's affecting our personal relationships with our loved ones. It's becoming something that is regular in our work. And yet it's estimated that when distracted, it could take up to 23 minutes to regain that same original focus. So how many of us work with our cell phones right next to us and we get a text from Sheng or from Zoe or something, and we go ping and we look and we respond, and then we try to go back to our work. Imagine that 100 times, 1,000 times a day. man, if I was your employer, I would be like, I'm paying you to do all that. I think you could be a little bit more of a performance-based employee. So when we don't take the time to dig deep and understand the why, our chances of not listening to ourselves and our own minds, to listen to each other, to be held accountable, go up. And our comfort zone, it just becomes greater. And so it becomes about complacency more than anything. And that's not good. We need to really be thinking about how complacent we are in our lives, in every aspect of our lives. So where do we go from here? And who's offering help? And this is for all my IDEO friends. You get to hire these amazing groups to come in, and you can spend millions of dollars for them to sort of look at your company and to advise you on certain things, and to develop programs which are really amazing. But the problem is that you can bring all these people in, but if your culture doesn't allow you to unlearn as it is now, because we live in a culture that's just about adding on. I mean, if you think about when you're in primary school, 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 2 is 4, and it keeps going on. At what point did we learn how to completely unlearn and deconstruct all that thinking? We normally don't get that opportunity, even in university settings. So we've got to be cognitive of that. And did you know the lowest scores when it comes to emotional intelligence are the CEOs of companies? And this is very fascinating to me because they're very much a top-down kind of thinker, right? They're the ones that have the most fiduciary interest of the stake and shareholders at their forefront of their thinking. They're the ones that are thinking of profit more often than anything else. And there are anomalies, and there are people who don't do that, which is great. But in general, this is something we need to consider. And so CEOs are like, well, let's go pay IDEO, let's go pay McKinsey, let's pay all these guys to come in and give us all these great suggestions, and it'll transform our culture. But very often, the transformation is not long-lived. It's a very expensive thing. And a lot of times a CEO will leave and a new one will come in and look at what they did and say, why did you pay all that money for this? And let's try this different thing. And so we live in a constant, perpetual state of kind of flux and confusion and somewhat chaos. So EQ is why there has to be a new approach to this problem, the top-up kind of top-down thing. And designers and creatives, like everyone on this Zoom right now, we're not so much about from the top down. We're more about from the bottom up, because we're the kind of boots on the ground. We're the people that are trying to really make a change in the culture, but we're fighting against a lot of the sort of corporate structures and whatnot. But this is our chance, and we can do this, you guys. For change to occur, we do have to look at ourselves. We have to remember the emotional self-awareness, the self-regulation, the motivation, empathy, our social skills. All those things tie into whether or not we can perform at that 58% or greater number I was referencing earlier. And remember this, it's about how we conduct ourselves when people aren't watching us too. So as soon as I'm done with this call and I get on to my work, my true colors come out. Right now, I'm hoping to impress every single one of you. I'm hoping that you see the value in what I'm doing and the research I've done. That's my motivation, right? But when I'm not talking to you, what is my behavior? What am I doing? And so according to research, and if you have not read this book, I highly recommend it. It is awesome, by Seth Stevens-Davidowitz, and it's called Everybody Lies. And one of the big things that I took out of that book is that America is addicted to pornography. And you don't want to believe that, but it's actually really true. Again, our behaviors when no one's looking, what is it, right? And so it's okay to be uncomfortable when you're discussing and learning about yourself and trying to rationalize these things, right? But you have to also understand that life begins at the end of that comfort zone. It doesn't begin right, in the middle of it. It's at the end of it, which goes back to the growth zone concept that I was sharing with you earlier. Remember this, Zoe? 36%?
Yeah, it's the people emotional.
Yes. You remember. Okay. So alrighty then, we're gonna play a quick game. I want you to look at this image and just be there for a second and be aware of your emotions and what you think when you see it, right? What about this one? Osama bin Laden's son, by the way, who was killed a year ago. So the question, and again, I'm zooming through this because this is a Zoom call. Is there compassion or is there judgment in your minds when you're looking at those images? Were you able to check yourself and catch yourself and feel something, but also be aware of that feeling? Sometimes it's just easy because, again, our phones are right next to us and we're kind of thinking about that next text message that we need to send out. So not being able to manage our emotions in the heat of the moment when we're kind of really in a challenge and you're in that 55 million meetings a day for 60 minutes, that's like draining and not worthy of anything, you miss out if your EQ is not being developed. And with all these things that I've been mentioning about the distractions, about the addictions we have, there is only one thing that we can do at this point. And I think you all will agree that we just need to stop and just smoke a little marijuana and relax a little bit, because it is so crazy of a time that we're living in. It's effed up. But anyway, I digress. And that was a joke, by the way, for those of you who don't quite still understand my terrible sense of humor. But, as Albert Einstein once said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, which is, I think, something we all fall into. It's a category that we can find ourselves feeling comfortable in, that we can no longer do anymore. So our work and our culture and the environment that we surround ourselves with has a big psychological effect on us. And when you're starting to develop the EQ, your confidence to take a risk goes up and to go out of your comfort zone. Remember, our bodies are great indicators for the sort of threat response, relaxation, the amygdala, the threat response kind of area of the brain that goes to the frontal cortex and sends out those messages. Those are things that we can now start to look at and say, what is my body telling me about what Jason's saying? I think he's full of shit, or I think there's something valuable there, but it makes me uncomfortable. So be aware of your feelings. And I want to just, on a parting thought, share with you, if you haven't thought about this, in terms of COVID, right? This is an amazing book by Marty Neumeier. He was very instrumental in Apple's success in the early days. He's into branding and marketing. But really, right now is the time to innovate. It's the time to do something different than what we've ever done before. Not allow COVID as an excuse to hold back and to go backwards, but to go forward. So use this time as a point to differentiate, to make a radical difference. Another book that I just referenced, and I think this is really important, is, with Google and with everything else trying to use data to understand the world, the big data revolution is less and more about collecting more data. It's about collecting the right data. And so it's important for us to really understand that there's a moral obligation in addition to just collecting information to justify a profit-based model. And if you have not read this, I've had the pleasure of writing a couple emails with Arturo Escobar. He's from Colombia, and he's a genius. And this is a huge book that is still hard for me to understand. I'm not as smart as a lot of you, so you might get it a lot quicker. But I mean, just understanding how we work within the confines and the ontological aspects of the matriarchal versus patriarchal constructs, and what that does as a design, what that does, how that affects urbanization. Highly recommend that book as well. There's a ton more that I would love to share with you. But again, I thank you for your time. I hope I didn't put you to sleep. Thank you, Kirsten, my sister, for helping me put together this information. And that is all I have for you. How long did that last, by the way?
100 minutes. Kidding.
Was I on mute the whole time? No.
I didn't count your time. It's unmeasurable.
It is.
Yeah, it's countless.
It's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for reminding me, since I was distracted by our Instagram account to make together. And lots of people respond to you.
What? So I'm looking at Andrea Garcia right now, and she's got this beautiful smile on her face. There it is. There it is. There it is. Okay, good. She's not asleep. That's good. So how do you want to do this? Do you guys have any questions for me? I hope you found that there was something valuable for each of you. I'd be more than happy to fly out and give you guys a greater, longer talk about this with some workshops if anyone's interested. Hint, hint.
Yeah, we do have lots of questions for you, and Shane gonna share the screen. And also many people respond to you on our Instagram, so that I was distracted a little bit. Wow, so many people focused on Jason's speech and has so many questions sent to me. Yeah. And
I'm scared now.
Yeah, Jason, can you pick up the questions you want to answer from this board?
God, they're all great. Let's see. Well, how do you detach yourself from emotions while designing so they don't hinder the process? Well, that right there is a conundrum, because the process is the question that has to be asked first. I mean, we have to stop. I'm not actually suggesting or saying that anyone's doing this, but it's like we have to use linguistics as an opportunity to understand why we are doing and saying what we're saying, right? So science is showing that 10 seconds before I just said what I said, I've already formulated this thought, right? So the idea is like, if I can catch myself sooner, and stop and really understand how my mind is working, I would maybe look at that and say, well, what is the process? What is the purpose of the process? Is the process the issue, or am I the issue? Or is this the corporate structure, the culture? Is that the issue? So to detach yourself from emotions, it's a muscle that has to be built. The EQ concept is really, it is an ongoing process for the rest of your life, starting this very moment, if you want to start now. So you have to really look at how you are receiving and understanding information, the way it triggers you, the way that you respond to it. And then that self-awareness, you then can understand linguistically, hey, this is actually something that doesn't really bother me as much as I thought it did, because this has nothing to do with me. It has something to do with something else. But a lot of times we're so emotionally, remember how I referenced we're emotionally charged people, and designers are particularly, we are very much in this like perpetual mind space where we're actually letting our past determine our future. And when we do that, then it's almost like the asking of a question of how to detach is like, well, why are we asking the detaching to begin with? Is it detaching because this future effort and potential output is already being formulated because I thought of it 10 seconds ago? Or is this, and then of course it's affecting the present because I've already formulated a thought in the future that's now moving into my moment by moment daily thing. So I'm not answering the question on purpose, but I'm giving hopefully an opportunity to think about something different. But and how can emotions drive good, bad design? Well, what is good and what is bad design to begin with, right? I mean, I have my interpretation of what that means, and I think that's it's something that I want to make sure that I'm allowing everyone around me to know that this is an area when they're talking with me that is safe, and it's okay to be able to ask hard questions and to discover for yourself who and what you really try to think about and live your life and design for. But I mean, emotions drive so much of it. And if you are in an environment where, if I'm your boss or I'm, the manager, and I'm not really fostering an environment where you can be the best that you can be, then unfortunately emotions will determine whether or not it drives good or bad design. And I would venture to say that business models and profitability drive good or bad design more so than emotions.
Yeah, actually, personally, I have a question about the emotion. You mentioned about self-demotion, because currently people have so many digital tools like for themselves to like detect emotion. For example, to use kind of like EEG or kind of brain like interface like detect the emotion. Do you think it is necessary, or like if there are some like tools for yourself to explore yourself?
I personally use bourbon or scotch, whiskey, to help me really find my emotions. Yeah. Zoe, did you like that joke? Again, another terrible joke. I would like to say that my recommendation is, I was referencing your body actually does tell you what's going on if you are in tune with it, if you listen to it. You don't need to buy technology. But if technology helps and there's some kind of a placebo effect that will somehow translate into something that would be meaningful to you to be more self-aware and to develop that muscle, then you should do it, because otherwise you fall into the category of being complacent because you're not investing enough in you and in who you are and the way that you do things. And that will manifest itself eventually through the design aspect. I will tell you right now, out of all the books that I've read, and all the classes and all the international design conferences that I've put on and curated, and talked to John Maeda and Debbie Millman, and just huge people that have taught me so much. You know what I learned the most about design was when I was living in Argentina, and I would go to this little tiny village that was about 3-hour plane ride and about a 7-hour bus ride to get to. And I was working with orphans and working at an orphanage and helping to build a kitchen so that they could have food, and to, paint beautiful pictures on walls to give them hope, right? I would say that taught me more about the sort of design and aspects of design and human connectivity than anything else. And I would love for everybody here to make sure that you're taking time to invest in those who are not as lucky as we are, and to put ourselves in those really hard situations. Not dangerous, but mine was dangerous actually a couple times, but it's just really important for us to do that. So that's my answer to your question. Is there anything else?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, if there's someone I want to ask, if you want to pick one more question, or I think it's the last question for our time.
Sorry, I did like this. How do you design your for sustainability when there are little to no career opportunities in the field? That is a problem. It's a problem. And I was very fortunate because Stefan Klamaneva and myself worked really hard to curate the first IDSA Sustainable and Circular Design Deep Dive this last June of last year. And we had about 600 people from all over the world participate with us and join us. And, the idea is that just like with DEI, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're still needing, there's just so much that we're not doing right? And sustainability is also with that. It falls into that category. And so in my opinion, what we have to do is create opportunities. And so I had Klinger Atlason from Atlason Studios in New York gave a presentation because he shifted his whole design firm to be circular design related and sustainable. So as a design consultancy, you're seeing efforts to do that. But again, if a company is based on profit and the CEO is scoring really low on the emotional intelligence and is really only looking at the fiduciary responsibilities and not what's really best for the environment, this is always going to be the conundrum. And so I think, when you have things like Kickstarter and crowdsourcing type of opportunities where you can create your own product that is sustainable, that is an opportunity for you to make a difference. But it's not easy, and I get it. And I mean, let's talk about it over a cocktail. As you can tell, I kind of like cocktails, and it's only 8:30 in the morning here. So no, I'm joking. But the idea is that I really think that there's something there that it's going to take time, and there's just so much marketing and messaging and greenwashing that it's gonna take a while for us to really get there. But we have a new political structure in place, and even though the new Green Deal is something that is probably not going to be brought to fruition, I, as the president or as the chair of IDSA, will certainly try my best to use that as a platform and as a catalyst to really bring forth more and more conversations about that. So, and from a designer feeling morally obligated not to add on to the waste pile, I mean, we're playing a game. This is a game. Design is a game, and there are rules and protocols and regulations. And as we are involving ourselves and deliberately choosing to be a part of this effort in this game, we have to understand that, strategically, there's things that are happening that are out of our control, and there are things that are. And I actually don't make a lot of money because of some of the things that I've just said, because clients don't want to hire someone who's going to be like, you're really not doing the best job that you can do. And I just don't have a desire to F around. I don't have a desire to waste more time. I want to work with people who are really, change agents and are doing things that are really unique and different. So again, this whole Make Together effort is an excellent opportunity to be the catalyst for this kind of a change. So I'm so thankful that you included me. And I know I talk a lot, and I'm sorry for that, but I hope again that some of you found some value in what I said. And if you want to carry on the conversation, I'm here for you.